This is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of FY Investment Group and your host of Washington Current Review, where we interview leading voices from business and politics that impact you, the viewer. Today, our guest is Mike Raschid. Mike is a partner of the international law firm Arner and Porter. He will be talking about some of the hot topics and some of the challenges we face in technology, entrepreneurship, and the law. Since he's a lawyer, so he's going to talk a lot about stuff that relates to the law. Mike, thanks for coming to our show. I appreciate that very much.
Frank, a pleasure to be here.
Now, tell me about your background. As I understand, your family came from Burma. That's a long way from the United States of America to United States. Tell me a little bit about it. Tell me your background.
Sure, Frank. I was born in Rangoon, Burma.
Rangoon, Burma.
And when I was about a year old, actually, there was a coup in Burma, as you know, and the military has ruled ever since. My grandfather was actually in the first civilian government, the democratically elected government of Burma. And that's really what led us to leave the country, because the military took over in a coup, and we thought the future in Burma was not going to be as bright. And so we eventually left there as political exiles, and I arrived in the United States through some intermediate steps. I arrived here at age 17 to go to college.
Ago.
Yes, many, many years ago. I arrived in the U.S. 31 years ago. So,
wow.
Yeah, so in 78. So.
Well, that's great. What led you to practice law? And especially, how did you decide to practice technology and intellectual property law? As you know, that's a hot topic, the
Yes.
intellectual property law these days.
Sure, Frank. The decision really to practice law, I think, came out largely out of family roots, and there were lots of influences from my forebears. One of my grandfather was himself a lawyer, my father's father. His brother was actually also a lawyer, trained in India and then went to Oxford and was India's ambassador in various European countries. My sister took up the law and went off to England to study at Cambridge, and she really was the one who encouraged me to study law. And so I did that, but then when you go into law, the issues that you think of are, it's such a broad field, and what should you specialize in? I had more of a technical sort of bent. I like things technological, and so I thought technology and intellectual property law would appeal to me, and sure enough, when I started practicing it, I really enjoyed it and kept up with it over the years. So that's how I ended up practicing technology and IP law.
Great. So tell us some of the interesting deals that you have worked on in the last few years.
Frank, as you know, the technology industry has had lots of ups and downs. So we've seen that as lawyers because we're representing people such as yourselves. I remember when you were at QSS doing all your deals.
What deal?
So we've gone with the ebbs and flows. Well, particularly your exit transaction was much talked about in the community, as you know, So I had the opportunity, for instance, on those kinds of deals. We've had IP issues come up in major mergers and acquisitions deals. Some of
IP means intellectual property.
Intellectual property, exactly. I use IP for shorthand. But some of the more interesting things I've worked on are AOL's recent deal a couple of years ago with Mitsui, where they did a joint venture in Japan for the advertising platform for AOL, and we were on the AOL side. Our firm has represented AOL for over a dozen years. And so my partner, Sue Hendrickson, and I lawyered that deal on behalf of AOL. That was very interesting because you had an interesting large counterparty in Japan on the other side, and you've got cross-cultural and issues and international legal issues. Some other deals I've done recently, there was a very large Italian defense contractor that acquired a local Washington area defense contractor. That was a very interesting deal with lots of complex issues and lots of intellectual property and technology issues as well. So that's, I think, a broad smattering of some of the matters I've worked on that
have you dealt anything as far as the intellectual property is concerned with India, which is a hot topic these days in India?
We have generally, it's inbound work from Indian companies.
Okay.
But we've also done, not at my current firm, but in my prior firm, we actually helped a couple of local companies, which many of which have operations in India, acquire an Indian company or companies. And so in any deal, there are intellectual property issues or technology issues that come up. In the case of the deal where the U.S. company was acquiring the Indian company, the U.S. company itself was a technology company, so sure, they needed lawyers like me to lawyer it. One of the more interesting inbound deals was actually at my old firm, Wipro was acquiring a services business here.
So the Wipro is a company in India.
The Indian company was, so that was an inbound deal, and we were the U.S. counsel to Wipro in their acquisition of the services business of AMS back then.
I just met Azim Premji not too long ago at US IBC conference.
Terrific.
Presidents and ambassadors of India to the United States.
Right.
He's a great guy.
Wonderful guy, and he was in fact behind the scenes on this deal, and he's got a terrific team that was lawyering it for him. So.
Right. Now, given the current economic climate, do you believe the Washington, D.C. area as a tech community will continue to generate enough deal flow for lawyers such as yourself?
I think so. The reason being, and we can talk about this a little later in the interview too, Frank, but this area is such a diverse area.
Yeah.
It's not just, as you know, because you were in the defense space with your company, and there's so many companies that are telecom, internet, government. They're also nonprofits in the area. So if you're a broad sort of full-service firm such as ourselves, you're able to pick up the deals that the various sectors in this area do.
Good point.
And so, you know, there's still a fair amount. When some of the, say, the venture-backed companies were down, some of our nonprofits were up. And indeed, one of them is deeply funded by the Gates Foundation and was doing some very interesting work with the TB vaccine. And so we helped them lawyer a couple of the deals for that to get the TB vaccine into the developing world and some of the work that goes behind it before this can be commercialized. So some of those kinds of things kept the area, I think, healthy during this downturn.
So what distinguishes the Washington, D.C. area tech community from those in other parts of the country, especially Silicon Valley?
I think
We're
the
not
Valley...
quite Silicon Valley yet.
That's exactly right, Frank. And the first point I would make there is the Valley is much more mature. I used to work for a Silicon Valley-based firm, but based here on the East Coast, and used to travel to the Valley a lot. And they have a much more mature community, as you know, both on the venture side and the tech side. I think we're getting there, but we're not as mature as they are. The advantage this area has, though, Frank, as you know, we've got these very mature defense contractors, huge titans that have a presence in this area. And many of those companies are working on interesting technologies that can be spun off, as you know, into the civilian sector, into the commercial sector. So I think that's a distinct advantage that Washington enjoys. The other area in which I think we really excel is we have so many international institutions, like the World Bank and the members of the World Bank, like the IFC and the like. I myself have done work for the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, as well as the World Bank on intellectual property matters.
You got the
If the Exim Bank, exactly.
You got the IMF.
Exactly. Now, while not all of them feed into the technology community per se, I think the defense sector certainly lends a lot of ballast and weight to the technology community in the area. And so things like Homeland Security, when they were up, when people started investing more in Homeland Security technologies, I certainly think this area saw an investment blip in the right direction.
That's a good point you made. So how has the tech community dealt with the recession, in your view?
I think different sectors of the tech community, Frank, have dealt with it in a different way. Some of the smaller companies, as you probably know, were asked by their board members to sort of reduce the burn rate to get through the downturn, knowing that things will improve, and they're starting to improve. Some of the larger multinationals in the area, because they're all over the world and also in different sectors, didn't feel the recession as much. And I certainly think, notwithstanding the change in the administration, the federal government and defense sector held up very well during the recession. So I think that the tech community is doing reasonably well and appears to be coming out of the recession in